Welcome to another video in what is an ongoing series of classes for Eve University. I am Amoni Panala. You might also know me as Zipporah Panala or Camille Panala. And these videos I create because I teach at Eve University and frequently get requests for recordings of the classes, but I feel uncomfortable putting people who are attending the class on the spot by recording the class. So instead, what I decided to do was I was going to record these classes separate from my teaching and then put them on YouTube. So that's what this is. Today we're going to be talking about an introduction to ship fitting. We're going to be going over the basics of how to fit ships, modules, skills, all that good stuff. So, if you have questions, because this is not a live class that you can participate in where I will answer your questions instantaneously, go ahead and leave a comment on this video and I will try to answer as many questions as I can, and we'll go from there. Can't promise to get all of them, but I will answer as many as possible. So today we're going to be talking about the ship fitting window. We'll talk about using skills, rigs, modules. We'll talk about the different tech levels. What you'll frequently hear is called uh, meta modules, or faction modules, things like that. We'll talk about scripted modules, how they work. We'll talk about stacking penalties, and we'll talk about tools that you can use to sort of noodle out or theory craft how you want to fit something without actually having to buy the um, the modules and put them on a ship and do all that. So uh, let's get into it. So I know this is a lot. Don't get intimidated. This is just the screenshot I have. This is everything that goes into your ship fitting window. So when you jump into a ship, you can open up the ship fitting window and it's going to give you this. This is going to show you your ship. It's going to show you all the modules and rigs that are fitted on the ship. So let's talk about the different parts. So starting with the high slots. These are where your guns, your missiles, your fireworks, okay? I cannot stress how much I think fireworks are cool. I think they're just a fun little thing that CCP put in. Um, you can fit fireworks on there. Um, you can put mining modules, cloaking devices, probe launchers, tractor beams. These are your high slots. Um, and I will point out here, you'll notice that you've got like a little missile launcher graphic there, and you've got 3 filled in dots here. These are what's called your hard points, and you've got one for missiles, and you've got one for turrets. These tell you the limitations on how many missile uh, missiles you can put on there and how many turrets you can put on there. So pay attention to that, because as you are starting to figure out, okay, I want to fit a ship. This is going to tell you how many missiles or turrets you can put on the ship, and that might affect how you fit the ship. Fun fact, uh, Fireworks do not take up a turret or missile hardpoint slot. So if you have one extra slot in there, like on this Nemesis, there's one extra high slot, you can put a fireworks launcher, or festival launcher is what it's called in game. Put one of those bad boys in there, and it'll provide endless amounts of amusement and awe for your friends. 10 of 10 would recommend. Next we have the mid slots. These are going to be your propulsion mods, your utility mods, your E-War. Um, this is going to be things like data and relic analyzers. Um, this is also where your shield tank is going to go. So if you are wanting to put shield tank on your ship, pay attention to how many mid slots you've got, because if you don't have enough mid slots, your tank is going to be crap. And lastly, we have low slots. This is where your damage mods, things that make you shoot better, are going to go. This is also where you can put in speed upgrades. This is where you can put hull tank and armor tank. Um, this is also where your damage control goes, which is easily one of the um, most useful tank modules that you can get. Um, so that's your low slots. If you want to fit armor tank, pay attention to how many low slots you've got. If you don't have enough low slots, your tank is going to be garbage. Now, I will say that in my example here, I have a Nemesis, which is a bomber. Bombers can't really fit tank, like, at all. They're just trash for tank. So this is kind of a bad example to show you tank. Um, but as you can see, there's 2 low slots. I've got 4 mid slots. I could, in theory, put one uh, one shield tank module in there if I wanted to. Or I suppose I could put one armor in there because I've got a blank low slot, but I'm probably going to want to put some missile damage mod of some sort on there. Um, So pay attention to your low slots for armor because that's going to be super important. Um, you want to make sure that you have generous low slots because you've got to share that then with your damage mods, um, and whatever else you might be putting the low slots, speed, whatever. Next, we have CPU and power grid readout. So in the bottom corner here, you're going to see CPU and you're going to see power grid. You're going to see 4 numbers here. Under CPU are the first 2. You're going to have the CPU that you're currently using and the CPU that you are. Goodness gracious, this alt text is just in the way constantly. Apologies for that. Um, So you have the CPU that you're currently using and the CPU maximum. And then below that you have power grid, and you have this power grid that you're using and the maximum power grid you can use. Um, these are going to be impacted by your skills, by the modules that you are using, as well as implants. Um, we're not going to get too much into implants because that is more advanced. And it's also very expensive, or it can be very expensive. I do have a class on implants, drugs, and boosters, which I will post to the YouTube eventually. We're working through these 1 week at a time. Next, we have rigs. And rigs are a little different than your than any other module that you have on your ship for a couple different reasons. So you're going to have two, maybe three rig slots. On my bomber here, I have two rig slots. You're also going to have rig calibration, which is similar to the way that CPU and power grid work. However, there are no skills that reduce the amount of calibration required to fit a rig. So you fit your rigs. Once you reach your rig calibration limit, that's it. There's no improving that. It's just a hard limit on how much rig utility you can get out of that ship. Um, Rigs also have a benefit and a drawback. The benefit is what you're putting it on your ship for in the first place. The drawback is something that you're going to want to train skills for to reduce. So it might be a 5% penalty to your armor tank if you've got speed a speed rig on there, right? A propulsion rig. And that those those drawbacks, you reduce them with skills, right? Each rigging, each type of rigging has a rigging skill that you can train up to reduce the drawback, which is fairly nice. Uh, Train them to 3, I would say, to start, then train them to 4 when you have time. And then once you train them to 5, you're going to be maxed out on your benefits for reducing the drawback. But it's not small. So it's definitely worth training those rigging skills to 3 to start, and then you'll want to train them to 4 when you have time, and then eventually, somewhere down the road, you're going to want to train them to 5 eventually. Okay. And in the bottom left-hand corner, we have two icons. One is a ship, which represents your cargo. And then below that, we have kind of looks like a claw reaching into like a big, like one of those claw games that reaches in and grabs a prize, right? That's your drone bay. And you'll see, again, 4 numbers. At the top, we have the cargo bay. That's going to show how much cargo you have in your cargo hold. And then below that is the maximum amount of cargo in meters cubed, right? So it's not the number of items you have in your cargo, it's by the volume, right? A lot of EVE Online is in meters cubed, which is the volume. How much in volume can you put in your cargo bay? The drone bay is similarly measured by how much volume you have in your drone bay, which admittedly makes it a little harder to figure out, uh, you know, how many drones can you put in your drone bay. You just have to know, right, that your drones take up this much volume, right? They're this much meters cubed. For example, light drones are 5 meters cubed. So if you have a total of 25 meters cubed in your drone bay, if you have a 25 meters cubed capacity, you can fit 5 light drones. My notes here say that these do not mix, and what they mean by that, what it means is that you cannot transfer from the cargo bay to the drone bay. You cannot transfer from the drone bay to the cargo bay. These two bays, once you're out in space, can't do anything about them. They are just like that. If you accidentally put your drones in the cargo bay and you meant to put them in the drone bay, tough luck. you're going to have to dock up and move them. But once you're out in space, you can't do anything about it unless you've got a mobile depot or a ship with a ship maintenance array. All right. So over on the upper right hand side, we have a couple of buttons you can push. Um, the first one, it looks like a little graph here. This is your ship attributes. By default, most people are going to have this already out when they open their ship fitting window. But if you ever see it disappear, you can always just click that little graph button and that'll pop out the ship attributes. This gives you all the details about your ship in terms of how much damage, how much capacitor, um, how much defensive power, what's your tank at, and it'll give you a breakdown of all of that information based on the ship that you are currently in, the pod that you are currently in. So if you've got implants in, it's going to calculate that too. And then it'll give you, you can also simulate, right? Which is this next button up here, this simulation mode, right? So if you want to test out a fit or you want to look at a fit at a glance, you can just open it up in the ship fitting window in the simulation mode, and then it's going to bring up this like holographic, semi-translucent version of the ship. It's going to give you your um, it's going to give you the fitting for that ship, show you all the modules that you can get, and you can also play around with what is the fitting like if I turn off this module and completely, if I offline the module? What does it look like if I overheat this module? What stats change, right? So you can play around with these things in the fitting window. All right. Next we have the browser and personalization. Okay. So the browser is this little wrench that you see on the left-hand side that's going to allow you to look for your ship fits that you've saved, right? If your corporation, like Eve University, we have some fits saved in our under corp fits, right? So you'll be able to see those as long as you have that checked on your browser. You can also look at different modules, right, and see what modules you can fit to a ship. I highly recommend that you um, make sure that you have, anytime you're doing fitting through the ship fitting window, that you have selected can be fit to the ship, because otherwise it will try to let you put a bunch of modules on there that don't go on that ship because they're the wrong size or whatever. So just be aware of that. We'll talk more about size of modules in a little bit here. The little box icon that you see on the left there, that's your inventory. Um, if you are in space, it's only going to show you what's in your cargo. If you are in a station, that's going to open up not just your ship, but it's also going to open up other ships that you might have in the hangar. It's going to show you items that you have in that station or structure. Up at the top left, you can see there's two tabs, fitting, which shows us the ship fitting window, but then you can tab over to what's called personalization. And that's where you can customize the look of your ship a little bit. So any skins that you have are available for you to put on the ship. You can also see available skins for the ship. Um, you might wish to purchase the skin, and so you can look at the options that are available. Um, just be aware that some of the skins that you will see are extremely rare event skins, or um, skins that were purchased at a specific time on the NES marketplace, and so they might be very expensive. Um, so just be aware of that. Some of them are very cheap. Typically, the Project Discovery skins are fairly cheap because so many people do Project Discovery, and so those skins are just kind of floating out in the ether um, for very low prices. And some of them actually look pretty good. I think the Project Discovery from 4 years ago or something like that, those skins look pretty good. I don't much care for the biosecurity ones, but to each their own. In the personalization, you can also put Corp and Alliance emblems. These are things that you get with Evermarks, right? And you can earn Evermarks through Paragon missions. You can some of your daily missions may include Evermarks as a reward. So that's where your Evermarks go to. So I told you not to freak out because obviously we made it through. This is everything. Um, it seems like a lot at first because there is quite a bit to know here, but once you've used it a few times, you're gonna feel a lot more comfortable just playing around with it. Definitely play around with the simulation mode because it is fun. It's fun to be able to experiment with ship fits. However, I'm going to show you something at the end that's even better than the in-game ship fitting window for playing around with fits. So, let's talk about skills. These are some skills you might consider training if you want to be able to put better modules on your ships, have an easier time putting the guns that you want on your ships, things like that. So, um, we have CPU and power grid management. These are your, right, remember your CPU and power grid, right? This is going to give you um, an increase of 5% in CPU and power grid for all ships, right? Um, you've got weapons upgrades that reduce the CPU need for any turret or launcher by 5%. Advanced weapons upgrade is similar but for power grid, right? You've got electronics upgrades, which reduces the CPU by 5% for the modules that require electronic upgrades. Shield upgrades does a similar thing with power grid. Energy grid upgrades does a similar thing for CPU by 5%. And mining upgrades does uh, a similar thing for CPU specifically for mining upgrades. Okay. Now, on our wiki, on the Eve University wiki, we have a whole massive list of skills that you can train. It's actually not massive, it's 14 skills. Okay. 14 skills that you can train called the Magic 14. If you go on the wiki, Eve University wiki, and look up Magic 14, you'll find it. These are all fitting skills that you can train up to get the best result for fitting, for general overall performance, regardless of the ship that you are training, that you want to fly. Um, they do take a long time to train up to 5, so consider training these to 3, maybe 4, right? Because that's where you're going to get the most benefit, right? Right off the bat. Train it to 3 or 4. You're going to get the most benefit out of doing so. And then later on down the line, you're going to want to start training those to 5, especially you're looking at training, uh, once you're looking at T2 guns, T2 tank, things like that. You're going to want to train some of those to 5 for sure. And eventually, you're going to want to get all the Magic 14 skills to 5. But to get you started, these are some good skills to train. Now, CPU and power grid are always going to be a thing that's going to be tight. It's going to be difficult to fit ships because some things are just really intense on the power grid, some things are really intense on the CPU limitations. And so one thing that you can do is you can put modules in that reduce or increase your CPU. So some reduce your CPU usage um, by increasing your capacity, um, and some improve your performance in terms of what modules you get benefits out of. So the coprocessor here increases your CPU by a percentage, right? Um, and there is a T1 and a T2 version of this. Um, the processor overclocking unit is a rig that you can fit. It increases CPU by a certain percentage. The drawback, again, remember, rigs come with drawbacks. The drawback is that it reduces your shield recharge time. So if you're shield tanked, right, and you put processing overclock unit rig on your ship, be aware your shield recharge has been reduced. For power grid, we have a few more options here. You have the micro auxiliary power core. This is just a flat bonus. This just gives you an increase in your power grid. You'll see this on small ships a lot. A lot of frigates, a lot of destroyers. Uh, Less benefit for bigger ships because it is just a small flat bonus, right? If you need more power grid on a big ship, you're gonna want to use something like the reactor control unit, which increases power grid by a percentage. You might use the ancillary current router, which increases grid by a percentage, right? But this is a rig, so pay attention to that. Then you have the power diagnostic system, which increases power grid, but it is a smaller um, percentage. The trade-off is you get a smaller increase in power grid, but it also improves shield and capacitor as well. So the power diagnostic system is a bit more of um, it's an all-around kind of like multi-bonus module. Now keep in mind that anytime that you put fitting modules in your ship, you are trading off something that directly increases the performance of your ship and what you're trying to do with that ship. So in order to fit these other modules, you are trading off being, you know, having to put in these fitting modules. So increasing your skills reduces how many of these kinds of modules you have to put in there. It increases your ability to fit things to your ship that are going to get better results from your ship. So it's all interconnected. Okay. So uh, modules have a couple different variations on them. They are going to have Tech 1, Tech 2, Storyline, Faction, right? Um, so over here we have Tech 1, right? And then we have Tech 2, we have Storyline, which honestly, I've never used a Storyline module in my life. So, you know, be aware of that. And then you have Faction. You have a bunch of different faction, right? Um, we have, Empire, right? Keldari Navy, Federation Navy, Republic Fleet, and then you have Pirate, right? So you have Dreadgradistas, um, Dark Blood, Shadow Serpentis, Canid, um, True Sancha. All of these have different fitting requirements. Okay? So, for example, right? Most Unistas are going to engage mostly with Tech 1 and T2, right? And the reason for that is that faction are extremely expensive, um, at least when you're just starting out in the game. Once you play a little bit longer and you figure out ways to make ISK, some of these will not be nearly as expensive as they first seemed. Some are just going to be expensive no matter what. But returning to Tech 1. So at base you have the Warp Scrambler 1. Okay, great. You have the faint Epsilon Scoped Warp Scrambler, right? This gives you increased range, right? Scoped is the thing that kind of clues you into what this does. The initiated compact warp scrambler is the one that is important to know for fitting, right? Compact version of modules are going to fit easier on a ship. So if you're tight on power grid and CPU, consider switching to a compact version of that module. Um, this is going to mean that you are making some sacrifices in terms of performance, right? It might be range, it might be a percentage decrease, it might be something else, but compact is going to allow you to get more of whatever kinds of modules you're trying to fit on your ship sometimes, right? Um, if you are ever unsure about the fitting, you can compare a little button down there, and you can select the different modules that you want to compare, right? You can see all of these modules and select the different things, right? So if you are comparing the compact with, say, the T2 version, and you want to see what you're giving up um, by what's called metaing down, right? So if you have a T2 module and you switch to the compact, you're metaing down to the compact version, right? You can take a look at some of these different, you can select some of these different uh, options here and then take a look at, okay, so I've got an increase in um, I've got an increase in CPU usage with the T2, um, but um, I'm also increasing my range. Here's 9,000 meters. Um, the compact has reduced CPU usage, but also only gets uh, 7,500 meters, right? There are some exceptions, especially when you're looking at faction, right? These are going to give you wildly different results, right? And be aware, if you see one that seems really, really good, chances are it's expensive. Um, I should say, how do you know if you're metaing up or down, right? It'll tell you, right? See here, Warp Scrambler 1, meta level 0. Initiated compact Warp Scrambler, level 1, okay? Warp Scrambler 2, meta 5, right? Um, if you are, this is a thing that Unistas run into a lot of times. They don't have the T2 guns yet, right? You haven't trained up the skills to be able to fly with the T2 guns, and that's okay. It takes time. Um, Pay attention to those meta levels on your guns because ideally you want the highest meta level that you can fit, right? The only thing that's going to prevent you from using, say, meta 4 guns if you can't fit T2 is price, because the meta versions are going to be more expensive than your T1, and sometimes they're going to be more expensive than T2 versions of those guns. So definitely as you're like figuring out your fitting, if you need to adjust fitting, like metaing something down, pay attention to how much that module costs, because your metaphor might cost more than the T2. It might cost more than your level 1. It's for sure going to cost more than your level 1. And it may be a good idea to consider switching to the Meta 3 because of cost. Okay, so now we have module sizes, right? Every ship has a size, right? And modules do too, or at least some of them do. Uh, Frigates and destroyers, as a general rule, are small. Cruisers and battle cruisers are medium. Battleships are large. And then caps, you're in XL territory. Um, be aware that there are some exceptions, right? These don't necessarily map cleanly with the ship size, especially as you get into like thinking about module size, ship mass, right? These things are not necessarily all the same. But for our purposes today, we're just thinking about module sizes. So frigates, destroyers, small, cruisers, battle cruisers, medium, battleship, large. Some modules like tank or prop, you might want to fit oversized or undersized modules. Oversized shield tank is very common. So you might see large on a medium ship. You might see medium on a uh, small ship. You might see XL on a battleship, something like that, right? It is not uncommon to fit oversized tank modules on your ships. It is also sometimes useful to fit an oversized prop on your ship, right? So for afterburners, the small is the 1 MN, medium is 10 MN, battleship is 100 MN, and then for micro warp drives you have the 5 MN, 50 MN for medium, and for battleships you have the 500 MN. The reason you might want to fit an oversized module is that you get better performance, right? So like an example I think of is a Loki, which is a strategic cruiser um, that can fit a 100 MN afterburner, right? Which is normally that goes on a battleship. You can put it on a Loki, which is a cruiser, right? And that's going to increase the speed of the Loki significantly, right? Be aware that doing that does require special fitting to accommodate the increase in CPU or power grade. All right, so now we've got scripted modules. Now these things they can be confusing, okay? So if you don't get it right away, that's okay. I highly recommend that you play around with these a little because it's a lot easier to see how this impacts your ship just by trying them out and using these different scripts, right? So here in my example, I have a tracking computer, okay? And um, I know from personal experience, tracking computers are super helpful, and using these scripts is super helpful. So when you fit a tracking computer to your ship, it's going to look like you can put ammunition in there, and that's for scripts, right? Um, at base, when you put in a tracking computer, you're going to get 5% increase in optimal range, 10% increase in fall off range, and 10% increase in tracking speed. When you put in a script, it's going to change those base stats around. So if you put in tracking speed, you lose your optimal range and your fall off range bonus, and you get a 20% tracking speed bonus. If you switch that out for the optimal range script, you lose all the tracking speed bonus and you gain 10% optimal range and 20% fall off range. when you are flying ships with a tracking computer, it is not uncommon to have both of these scripts in your cargo hold and swapping between them, right? Based on the circumstances. If you're doing PvE, it might just be that that one rat is way out there. If you are in PvP, you might switch just to hit the target further, or to um, change up because you were shooting a battleship, now you're shooting frigates, and you need to switch to your tracking speed, right? The nice thing about these scripts is that you can change them out while in space, so you don't have to dock up to change them. Now let's talk about stacking penalties. Okay. Now many modules are going to um, have a penalty for using more than one of them. So in this example, we have the inertial stabilizer 1. Okay. So it improves your handling and maneuverability, right? So this is like things like align time. Okay. The penalty says using more than one type of this module or similar modules that affect the same attribute on the ship will be penalized, right? So it's not just the inertial stabilizer, it's other modules that impact the same attributes, right? So if you have something else that improves ship handling and maneuverability on your ship, you are going to receive a stacking penalty, okay? And what this is, right? So you have, let's say you have one inertial stabilizer and no other modules that impact handling and maneuverability, okay? You're going to get 100% of the effectiveness, right? After that, it goes quickly down, right? So at two modules affecting the same attribute, you have 89 or 86.9%. Three, you get 57.1. And then continuing on down, you can read the graph, right? 28.3% at four modules. 5 is 10.6% effectiveness. 6 is 3% effectiveness. And at 8, you get 0.1%, right? So there is a serious limit to how useful it is to just put modules that affect all the same attributes, right? Um, Generally speaking, I my experience is that the max is really 3, right? Your limitations on how much benefit you really get is right at that 3 module. Anything below that, and the cutoff is just so huge. That drop off, 57.1%, then with 4, 28.3%. That is huge, right? Um, so really 2, maybe 3, if you're really desperate for that increase. Um, Generally, you don't want to go beyond that because the effectiveness just drops off so significantly. And then what are you even doing at that point? Okay. Now I have some examples here. I'm not going to spend too much time on them because honestly, it's very boring to hear me talk about numbers. But just to give you some ideas, we'll go over these examples real quick here. So right here we have a sensor booster with a base lock range of 45 kilometers, right? A scripted sensor booster, right? So you put in the script. Now your lock range is at 72 kilometers. This is without stacking penalties, right? Your total lock range is 72 kilometers. With stacking penalties, right? You're getting 100%, times the 60%, it's going to give you roughly 60%. It's not exact, right? You math nerds are going to know what that exact, can probably figure out what that number is, but you're getting 72 kilometers. Okay, so no big deal, right? Now we're adding uh, additional, right? So with additional, with an additional module, um, we're looking at a increase and a loss, right? So we're getting a performance boost of um, we're getting a performance boost that takes us up to 94 kilometers. This is without stacking penalties. But then with stacking penalties, we're losing 3 kilometers of performance, which, maybe it's worth it depending on what you're trying to do. Once we get up to 3 modules, over on the um, over on the right hand side here, you can see the percentages, right? Remember, uh, two modules gives you a stacking penalty of 86.9%, right? So over on the left hand side, we've got a scripted sensor booster, and a signal amplifier, right? So the scripted sensor booster is giving us a 60% increase. The sensor booster is giving us a 30% increase, which brings us up to 94 kilometers. And now we have a signal amplifier, which is another, which would give us 30%, which uh, would be a total of 122 kilometers. But there are stacking penalties. So we've got 60, 30, 30, but we also have to factor in the penalties. So for the second, we've got the 86.9%, brings it down to 26%. The third module only has a 57.1% effectiveness, which brings it down to about 17. So we get about 106 kilometers, which means that we're losing uh, 16 kilometers of uh, locking range due to the stacking penalties. Okay. And here's four. I'm not going to read it all out because it's a lot. But just be aware that, like, everything, everything, including what we call links or boosts, right? So you've got a ship out there blasting those bright colors into space and giving you bonuses, right? That is also factored in here, right? So here on the left-hand side, you can see what you would be getting with all four of these: 163 kilometers. With the um, with the stacking penalties, though, you're only getting 119 kilometers. That's a 44-kilometer loss. Okay? So the stacking penalties are no joke, right? And if you're going to get into theory crafting a fit, you really have to think about the use cases. Are there going to be links on grid? Are you using scripts? Are you using, you know, factor in all these things, and we haven't even talked about like remote sensor boosting, right? Which would, if we added remote sensor boosters to this, we would decrease it down to, um, I think it was like 10.6% or something like that, right? And then we would see our loss in efficacy even would be even greater, right? At the beginning, I said there would be, I would talk about things that are more fun to play with in the ship fitting window, and this is it. PyFa and eveworkbench.com. Now, I personally prefer PyFa because that's what I use and that's what most of the people I know use. But that's not to say that eveworkbench is bad. Uh, PyFa is a third-party app that you can download on your computer, and it works great. It can be a little finicky when it's time to update. So when there's a new expansion or something like that, and there's been um, significant patches to the game that change the balance of ships and ship fits and modules and all that, PyFa is going to need to be updated. I found updating it a little annoying. I had to reinstall the whole thing just to update it because the auto updater feature just did not work for me. But that aside, I find PyFa incredibly useful. And the reason for this is that you can not just simulate a ship you might want to fly, but you can also simulate it what it would be like if you were using specific types of drugs and boosters and implants and figure out an optimal fit for using all of those different things. That's just something you can't get from the in-game ship fitting window, which, to be fair, is great. But compared to PyFa and Eve Workbench, it's it's a child's toy compared to these two tools. And as I said at the top, please be sure to ask your questions as comments in the video. I will try to get to as many of those as possible. Can't promise to do them all, but I will try to get to as many as possible. Also consider like, subscribe, and hit the bell if you want to get notifications about when the next class video comes out or other content that I put on this channel. I'm hoping to get videos of some fights that I'm in because I think those are fun for some people. Um, I just have to remember to record when we get into these big fights, but I might do some like breakdown videos of what's going on in these fights because I know that especially for Unistas who are just getting started, watching a fight video, it may not be super obvious what's going on because there's so much information on the screen. Um, but until then, I wish you all the best. Fly safe or dangerous. I'm not your boss.